Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking back at all the Formula One news which broke in the past week. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam, absolutely Coop, and the man, I don't know what that was, Sam, but the man, the myth, the legend, leader of the Ian Parks.
I did it in the Whisper Challenge. And when I came, when you
the Whisper
introduced me,
Challenge,
like,
yeah. The Whisper Challenge, which we did do very, very wrong, it turned out in the end. But anyways, if you haven't seen that, go and watch that on YouTube because,
please do, folks. It's funny.
The less said, the better, I think, about that. Let's get things started, guys, because as you can see, for those who are watching this on YouTube, we're back in the United Kingdom, no longer in Eindhoven after a brilliant trip. And I'm going to come to you first, Sam, before we do a little question, because it's a really interesting time of year. I kind of refer to it personally as it's the calm before the storm. The previous season finishes, you get a few rumours for a couple of weeks, and around Christmas, everything just stops. We're now in the middle of January where all of a sudden a few little leaks of renders are coming out. You're starting to get some drivers conducting private tests. There's also some rumours of potential driver moves, team principal moves. It is that kind of year where slowly things are starting to warm up again.
It really is. It's almost in it.
Almost in the first 2 minutes.
You can tell that we had like late flights last night.
Particularly if you're watching.
It's that time of year where, in some ways, these little kind of, I think nonsense is harsh, but these little things that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on in the season do come to the fore a little bit. And, fans are, looking for that news because it's not as free flowing as it usually is. I mean, one example that I think is hilarious, to be fair, and I think it would make headlines anyway because of just, I don't know, is it a generational gap? Is it just a plain oversight? But there was a Flavio Briatore shared clip of an Alpine meeting earlier this week. We were just kind of, getting ready for the new season. Some eagle-eyed social media users noticed that there are renders of the 2025 Alpine car, or the livery more specifically, on the table. The post was then taken down, but it looks like we're going back to a blue and pink Alpine because, as we all know, last year there was a bit of a furore around the hinting that the Alpine would be pink or have a bit of a camo livery, and then it just being exposed carbon. People were really upset about that. So, I don't know if that was intentional by Alpine.
An Alpine leak.
Yeah, was that?
I think the fact the video was taken down gives you a good indication as to we've made a bit of a mess up on this one. Quick, get rid of it before anybody else spots it. But too late, folks. We got the story out there. So,
Okay, right. Let's do a quick quiz question because our fans seem to love these. You two seem to as well. And it's a question to do with Kimi Antonelli. Excuse me, because he is somebody we're going to discuss later on in this episode. But Toto Wolff came out with a really interesting line to German media, Automotor and Sports, last week, in that he revealed that Antonelli, despite obviously being an F1 rookie, has conducted 9,000 kilometers across all his various tests. My question to you two is, how many race distances is that equal to?
I know.
Yeah.
All right, hold on. I'm going to let Sam knows. You can both give an answer. Sam, what do you think?
And this is
I
this where
I know as well.
Is this where I back up how bad I am at maths for the potential miscounting error in the Whisper Challenge? Is it? I'm gonna be really pernickety here and say, is it 29 when you factor in that a Grand Prix is 300 kilometers plus one lap? So it's in theory 30, but I'm going to say 29.
Ian?
It's actually, I would go with that because it'd be easy to say, 300 kilometers a race, that big, make it 30 races. But as Sam's rightly pointed out, most Grand Prix are usually 303 kilometers, 304 kilometers. Spa, I think, is actually 306 or something along those lines because of the length of Spa. It's more than likely.
Actually, I can tell you specifically, Spa is 7.004 kilometers. I have a
Yeah,
a
that means
picture.
the actual full length race distance is something around 306 kilometres long. But yes, anyway, long story short, I think 29, bottom line, 29 is probably the correct answer.
You can both have the point. It's 29 and a half. So,
oh, for God's sake.
Come on. Yeah.
Well, if it's maths
You
rules,
said
we
race
round
distances.
up. Okay,
we don't have half a
if
race, do we? Unless, hold on.
True.
I tell you what we can go with, 29 plus a sprint.
20, I will give you that. 29 plus a sprint.
Yeah.
All right, let's let's dive into things, because as you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, us three have looked better. It's been a very long 24 hours in particular. We are actually recording this episode on Friday morning simply because there is so much to discuss. And let's kick things off. And Ian, I'll come to you on Max Verstappen, because an interesting story came out from the Daily Mail regarding a potential $1 billion deal offer to Max Verstappen to join Aston Martin, which was, well, it's safe to say, categorically denied by Aston Martin themselves.
I'm going to pass this one over to Sam. Yes, you're right. It was absolutely categorically denied, but Sam worked on this particular article. So I was traveling at the time. I was actually flying back. So I'm going to pass over to my good colleague.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, I was in the airport working on this. So, seeing behind the curtain of the glamorous life of a of a journalist. But yeah, so essentially the Daily Mail has kind of quite outlandishly claimed that a close ally of Lawrence Stroll, Jefferson Stack, has been using Max Verstappen as a bit of a bait, bit of a ploy to court new investment and sponsorship for Aston Martin. So the suggestion is that he's been telling people that basically Verstappen to Aston Martin is a done deal, or it's very much in the works
for 26.
For 26, yeah. That isn't the case, as we know. Aston Martin have categorically denied it, whilst reiterating that both Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso are contracted for the 2025 and 2026 seasons. So, yeah, it's this big kind of story that's been made out of the suggestion that this deal would be worth up to £1 billion over the duration of the contract, which obviously is huge money. The estimates that Verstappen is on about 50 million a year in pounds, about 55 million euro. So you'd be looking at, across, say, a 5-year deal, which is what is suggested, a fourfold increase in his salary. So you're talking silly numbers.
200 million a year.
And also a kind of Newey-esque shares arrangement as well. So he'd actually be bought into the ownership structure as well. So completely unprecedented, but as I said, completely unfounded and now categorically denied.
It's winter silly season.
It's winter silly season.
Really
it's a boatload of money, which I hope you guys see what I did there, because Max Verstappen has actually gone and bought a new yacht and named it Unleash the Lion. So we got that in as well. Thank you very much. I might be tired, but I'm still here and on form. But Ian, I'll come to you on this point, because even prior to this, of course, there have been a couple of rumours linking Max to Aston Martin for several reasons. Of course, you look back at 2024, there was the big investigation, which of course was completely cleared into Christian Horner. There was then the spat between his father, Jos Verstappen, and Christian. There was, of course, the rumoured power struggle between Christian and Dr. Helmut Marko. There was, of course, on top of that, several senior figures departing. Jonathan Wheatley, who we'll discuss a little bit later on. Adrian Newey, who we now know is going to start at Aston Martin on March the 3rd. And you look at Aston Martin, of course, they're gaining Newey. They're gaining Honda, in particular in 2026, who, of course, have been key to Red Bull's dominance with their powertrains. It's an interesting one, because it's one of those rumours which, of course, despite this story from the Daily Mail, has been around for a little while.
What, Max moving?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the fact that, bearing in mind everything that happened across 2025... Sorry, 2025. Oh, that's
2024. We're in 2025.
We are in everything.
It's been a long 17 days.
2024. 2024, of course, with everything that went on behind the scenes, and which we've covered across many podcasts, many updates, etc., etc. Of course, it appeared at the time Max was destabilized. Toto Wolff was adding to that destabilizing effect by saying, "Yeah, we're really interested in signing Max." And Max has turned around at the end of last season and saying he's staying with Red Bull for the duration of his contract. We'll see if that actually does come to fruition. But yeah, when a driver signs that length of contract all the way through to 2020, the end of 2020, oh God almighty, this is terrible. Anyway, I'll try and carry on. When a driver signs that length of contract all the way through to the end of 2028, there are always going to be ups and downs, bumps in the road, fluctuations in form. It can't all be plain sailing for that period of time. So quite obviously, given the nature of Formula One, given the industry that we work in, of course, you will ultimately get a driver linked with another team at some particular point. Max being world champion, of course, and a 4-time world champion at that, a deserved 4-time world champion, quite naturally, his name is always going to come up in conversations with the other big teams, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, etc. Aston Martin now, of course, because of the money behind that particular team. So this is not going to be the end of it. You know, he's got another 4 years left on this contract. It's staggering to believe, isn't it?
A long time.
That he's, yeah. And this contract was signed quite some time ago.
Yeah.
Another 4 years. So you've got another 4 years of speculation. And obviously, if he does continue to stay with Red Bull and there are no extensions to the contract through that period of time, you can imagine by the time we get to 27 and 28, it will be, what is Max going to do with his life and career? Because he's already talked about the fact that he doesn't want to stay in F1 for a Fernando Alonso or Lewis Hamilton-esque period of time and go all the way into his 40s. So, as I say, it's not. This is just going to continue, all this Max speculation. It doesn't matter. And how many times he can turn around and say, I'm going to stay with Red Bull. Whilst there's going to be these options on the table, he will always be the first name to the fore as to moving on somewhere else.
I also think it's quite refreshing, though, how Max has viewed the contract or viewed his situation with Red Bull. It's almost kind of tantamount to being in a marriage where it's very much, yes, there are going to be difficult points. There's going to be lean periods, but these are my guys. Like, we're going to work through this. Just because one side of that relationship, the Red Bull side in delivering the car and what he needs to win, has wavered slightly. It's, you know, it's not as sure-footed as it looked 12 months ago. He doubled down on that last season. By all accounts, Christian Horner really made the point. He has spent far more time in the factory. He's invested in this team. He's committed to bringing it back. He's not just going to run and hide, cut loose. So I think that's a really nice thing to see, because these contracts, you look at them and go, that's so long. You just can't possibly legislate for how a team's going to be doing over a 4 or 5 year period. But he's done it. He's committed, and he is, so far, through all that speculation, staying with that commitment. And so, it might get to a point where he goes, this really isn't tenable anymore. I cannot win here. I need to move on. But so far, he hasn't just, as I said, run at the first sign of trouble.
But
that was credit to him. No, just very quickly, that was credit to him last season for what he did do. And Christian Horner, in an interview I did with him at the end of last season in Abu Dhabi, made it absolutely clear that Max was at the forefront of that turnaround towards the end of last season, after Max had turned around and described his car after the Italian Grand Prix as an absolute monster. He said he was there putting in the effort, putting in the work with the team, both at the factory and at the track, just basically wanting to get everything right. And that's what you would expect of a driver of his caliber, a driver of his quality, a driver of his champion status, wanting to push that team forward. And, there was no holding back. There was no, whatever, I might leave anyway or whatever. Do whatever you can, guys. I'm just going to take a back seat on this. No, he was at the forefront driving that. So it gives you a good idea as to the relationship that he has with Red Bull, that I think he does want to stay, because he does love that team. They've nurtured him all the way through since he was a teenager. And he's never mentioned it like Lewis Hamilton has. Whereas Lewis, we all we all know in the back of his mind, there was that desire to go to Ferrari. Lewis's name has been linked with Ferrari on numerous occasions prior to him actually joining a year ago. The announcement being made a year ago and him signing for the start or joining the start of this year. Whereas Max, there's been nothing along those lines of him saying, yeah, it'd be great to drive for Ferrari once in my career, or yeah, I wouldn't mind working with Mercedes. He's not done that. Red Bull is his team.
It's been mainly, it feels, with Max, kind of rumours from the outside at him rather than from rumours from inside the camp out kind of things. But the interesting thing, Sam, I want to go back to something you mentioned, Sam, in that, you can't predict how a team's going to perform in 4 or 5 years. And obviously a season in particular where there's a lot of questions around how Red Bull will perform is 2026. And of course, the season, which will be the first of the new power unit regulations. Red Bull will, of course, power themselves, something it has never done before. And there's a lot to talk about it because some are expecting Red Bull to potentially not do very well and struggle, as you would probably expect for a manufacturer in their first season as a manufacturer in Formula One. And what's really interesting is the fact that Lance and Fernando have both got contracts until the end of 2026, opening up 2027. I did make a prediction in a few podcasts ago that I think Max will do 2026 with Red Bull to see how that goes. And if they do really struggle, then maybe 2027 move. And in my opinion, actually, when you look at the teams on the grid, Aston probably does make the most sense given they have Honda, who, of course, Max knows very, very well. And, of course, the big one being they have Adrian Newey, who's going to be designing, guess what, their 2026 car.
I think what really works well for Max in how
it would be nice for Sam to say just once, absolutely. He paused again. He was going to say absolutely. Come on, it's your nickname now, Sam. Just once every podcast, you've got to get in the word absolutely, just to live up to your moniker.
And it's down on us to try and pick it out as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's so conspicuous. I don't think I can just slip one in there without you noticing. So I think how things have shaken out for Max Verstappen and where Honda going to Aston Martin and Mercedes remaining a very strong option for him, just to add to Ian's point as well, all of that kind of noise inside the paddock, if there has been any, is from Toto Wolff and Mercedes on that kind of possible will they, won't they down the line. But with Max's options, he's got Aston Martin, which will be Honda, check. Adrian Newey, check. Infinite resources, clearly, check. So there's so many options there for him. He knows that it will feel familiar in many ways to him. But then you've also got Mercedes that is an omnipresent option for him. And we know how well Mercedes adapted to the last major power unit change in 2014. They were straight out the gates, far clear of everyone else. So if Red Bull does stumble when it comes to their power unit, he will be able to see that over the course of that 2026 season. So the timing works very, very well. I think, it doesn't have to be the same size fits all for all drivers. I think Lewis's move where he gets to directly influence how 2026 shapes up for Ferrari makes a lot of sense for Lewis. He's made that work in the past. But I think this is how Max can kind of adapt, is seeing where things are heading and then making that course correction. But again, write Red Bull off at your peril.
Absolutely.
People are quick to, because, how good could a brand new power unit possibly be? They've poached some pretty good, pretty big and good names for that project. Yeah. And they've been working with Honda over these years. It's very much not, okay, Honda, you make that for us. Cheers, here's a paycheck. It's, okay, we'll do this together. It is a partnership. So they're not coming in blind to this. So yes, whilst we're expecting Mercedes to be really strong, those expectations actually could be their downfall because we're anticipating maybe too much from them.
Yeah, we're expecting a repeat of 14, aren't we?
Exactly.
When they came out the box with that power, with the current power unit, and they just destroyed the opposition for the first few years until the opposition eventually caught up. So, but 26 is that great big clean sheet of paper that everybody, you can't write off anybody because we just do not know who is going to come out the box. And it's not just the power unit, it's a complete new chassis on top of that. So fascinating 26, but we're getting 1 year ahead of ourselves because
We are.
we're still at
As
the start.
Well,
Why not? Still at the very start of 2025.
Let's let our fans decide in the comment section below if you're watching this podcast on YouTube where you think Max will race in 2027. Getting a bit far ahead of ourselves, but comment a green circle if you think it'll be Aston Martin, a blue circle if you think it'll be Red Bull, and a black circle if you think it will be Mercedes. It'll be really interesting to know your points, and if you want to put a little explainer on top of that as well, we'd love to read your comments, which we always do. Let's stick with 2025 in and the current news, but actually sticking with Aston Martin because there has been two pretty interesting, obviously, discoveries over the past week. First one being Andy Cowell is now its team principal, not Mike Crack, but also a start date for Adrian Newey in really the big news, March the 3rd, which, interestingly, whilst we know he's going to be focusing on the 2026 car, because of obviously the way the calendar forms this year, and that actually the first race isn't until the middle of March, how it kind of used to be. I suppose if Adrian wanted to, there is a bit of time to be involved in the 2025 upgrades for Aston Martin's new car.
And in addition, Sam and Nick, just because we're recording this, as you mentioned, Nick, on Friday morning, not on our usual Monday, because I'm attending a function on Monday morning down at Haas. Aston Martin has also made another announcement with the hiring of Gary Gannon, who will be serving as a senior race engineer. They've not announced yet as to which driver he will be working with, either Fernando or Lance. But Gary Gannon, for anybody who knows the name, or for those obviously for those of you that don't, he worked with Nico Hülkenberg at Haas. He was at Haas for 10 years, but also previously he was worked with Michael Schumacher. So he's got a good pedigree behind him. So as Gary Gannon, so yet again, another quality hire made by Aston Martin. Of course, the biggest quality hire made by Aston Martin, probably in its history so far, is of course Adrian Newey. We're coming up to nearly 9 months now since it was announced that Adrian Newey would be leaving Red Bull after 19 years, during which time he has helped the team win an additional 8 drivers' titles and 6 constructors' titles. And within himself, of course, becoming the most storied designer in F1 history. So, yes, as you say, finally he's got a start date, Monday, March the 3rd. We've just been discussing 2026, but you can imagine the bulk of Adrian's remit will be, of course, focusing on those 2026 regulations. What he can do in the very short term to assist the 2025 car, we'll have to wait and see, because as we know with this 2025 car, pretty much every team is only going to go about 3, maybe 4 months into the season before it completely switches off that program and devotes every single resource to the 2026 car, because that's where the priority will lie. Every team will want to come out of the box straight away next year. So Adrian, great signing for Aston Martin. He's got a lot of great people working around him. Will he be able to replicate the success with Aston Martin that he's had at all of his previous teams? Of course, that's only a matter of time. It's what Aston Martin will naturally be expecting of him. So, and now he's got a new team principal to work with, Andy Cowell.
Another change.
I like Mike Crack. Had many a good conversation and interviews with Mike during his time. He's not left, of course. Mike's got a new role. I think it's, Chief Trackside Officer or Head of Trackside Operations or something along those lines. So he's still going to be with Aston Martin at every Grand Prix, overseeing the trackside stuff, but now working beneath Andy Cowell as the new team principal. Andy, of course, previously the power unit designer with Mercedes. So you can imagine that Andy's probably going to have a good input with Honda going forward as well into next season's regulations. So a lot of work for Andy to do in a very short period of time, but a good name nonetheless as a team principal, that's for sure.
Yes, yeah, it's a very busy time for Aston Martin, quite clearly. Shall we halt the Aston Martin talk there and move on, Sam? What do you reckon? Because I'm going to come to you next. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm now really curious as to what.
Well,
He did it. He did it.
the
He got
next,
one in.
he did do it. He did do it. And we noticed as well. So thank you
You
very
know
much,
what? I
Sam.
didn't even know. I didn't.
Brilliant. There we go. There we go. Right, let's come to you then. Whilst you,
Was that
Go
not
on.
deliberate?
You absolutely set me up there. Oh, goodness me. If this wasn't a family-friendly podcast, I swear at you.
Yeah, I don't want to click the explicit button because it loses us views. Let's discuss Kimi Antonelli. Of course, we discussed him in last week's rookie special episode, but of course, we've got to discuss him again because he's been a busy boy. Mercedes has conducted a 2-day test with him at Jerez using, interestingly, the W11. It's 2020 car, obviously the last car that Lewis Hamilton won, obviously his 7th driver's title. It's an interesting one because, of course, that's the previous regulation, something very, very different. But of course, it is for Antonelli using a camouflage livery, might add as well. It's his first test officially as a full-time F1 driver. I'm guessing this puts him over the 9,000 kilometers mark.
You'd assume so, given that stat is already floating around there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's interesting timing and also use of the car because it's January, and yes, Jerez is in the south of Spain, significantly warmer usually than kind of where we reside, but it is January nonetheless. And a previous car, there's an element of just get as many miles or kilometers under his belt as possible. I think what's really, really interesting, though, is the use of the camo livery, because you think, well, where's the virtue in using a camo livery on a car that's, 4 or 5 years old? Point I made to Ian yesterday in the office was maybe they're trialing it to see how effective it is with a view of using it in pre-season testing. And so, yeah, there's a lot of speculation around what Mercedes off-season plans are around their launches. As we know, there will be the F175 F1 Live event on the February 18th, but some other teams are launching their cars separately, and it will just be a livery situation. So there's a little bit of talk as to what might happen there. So yeah, potentially they're kind of it's almost a 2 birds 1 stone type scenario. But as I said, predominantly the more miles the better for Kimi Antonelli at this stage.
And of course, Ian, Antonelli wasn't alone at Jerez. There was also Haas there with obviously its drivers using an older car, conducting, and was a really big moment for the team, its first ever TPC test.
Huge, but a great opportunity for us.
Yeah.
They've got all new driver lineup this year. Esteban Ocon partnering Oliver Behrman, so they're going to want to get those guys as integrated as much as possible. I think it was probably less about driving the 2-year-old car and more about learning the procedures with the team, getting to know their engineers, of course. That would have been crucial, building up that early relationship, setting the stones in place to then build on going into the season. So, but I'm sure a hugely beneficial test for both the team and the drivers in that early bedding in phase before we, go into the pre-season test in Bahrain. And especially as we know that the drivers only get 1.5 days apiece in the car in Bahrain before just under 2 weeks later, they're then actually in the car properly for the opening Grand Prix in Australia this year in mid-March.
And of course, one driver who's not on the grid this year, but I want to come to you, Sam, and discuss it because it was very, very funny, is Valtteri Bottas. And, well, is there a Valtteri Bottas barbershop coming? I don't quite know because he posted, probably the funniest driver-based post of the year so far. I know it's only January, but still.
Yeah, you could argue that he won the accolade. Was it last year with the Uber Eats advert, or was that the year before? The Valtteri Bottas, viral fun, it all merges together eventually. But yeah, so he shared in tandem with his "What's Next" slogan, where he released a clothing line with that logo, that saying on, and some of the proceeds go to people who have suddenly found themselves out of work. So him finding the funny side of being let go by Stake. he's put this video out where he's getting his famed golden mullet, sorted by his barber, and he drifts off daydreams about running his own barbershop and adorning all his customers with the golden mullet himself. Obviously, we know that is at the moment still a dream. Whether or not he does it down the line, I'd love to see it. A Valtteri Bottas chain of hairdressers would be very popular, no doubt. But yeah, as we know, he has moved on to pastures new or returned to pastures old, potentially, with joining Mercedes. But yeah, I would recommend checking out that video because it is very funny.
I think Mercedes F1 are missing a big opportunity there, because I reckon they need to create a pre-race segment where they have Valtteri Bottas maybe having his own barber shop, and ahead of every race, obviously it could be pre-recorded, of course, they have a driver come in and maybe Valtteri does the hair and they have a little chit-chat, a bit of an interview, and it becomes, I don't know, Valtteri's barber corner. I don't know what they would call it, but I think that'd be quite funny. But let's stick for the final talking point. Ian, I'll come to you. Ian, Sam, I'm glad you brought stake up, because Ian, of course, Aston Martin, Andy Cowell's the new team principal, but at stake, I know they didn't really have a team principal, but the person who was effectively holding that role in many ways is no longer there.
Yeah, it had the role of team representative, which was a very unusual job title, it has to be said, to be given. But when he first came into the role, as Alessandro Aluni Bravi took on that position as team representative, simply because they wanted someone just to almost like fit in between a more official position overseeing the team and everybody beneath. Wanted more of a spokesman type figure. And again, Alessandro, another good character that I really liked, got to know him quite well over the period of time. And yeah, he's gone. And that was announced last week. If you're obviously you're going to be listening or watching this on the Monday, as we normally post our podcast. So he went last week. And it's now been confirmed that Jonathan Wheatley, the Red Bull sporting director, will start earlier than planned. And he will come in after the first two races of the season. So he will be in charge from the Japanese Grand Prix onwards. It was anticipated, given Jonathan's contractual situation and what was initially negotiated between the Sauber organisation and Red Bull, that Jonathan would not start until somewhere around the midway point of the season. But the Sauber organisation, that of course will become Audi in 2026, has managed to get Jonathan a little bit early. What we don't know at this stage, and because Sauber hasn't actually officially confirmed that Jonathan will be starting early, is that who will be in charge for the opening two Grand Prix in Australia and China. You would assume, given Mattia Binotto, former Ferrari team principal, of course, and who is the CEO and CTO of Sauber going forward, you would, as I say, assume that he will have that position for those two Grand Prix. So waited to be confirmed, but at the moment, yes, Sauber has got its man from Red Bull nice and early, with Jonathan Wheatley coming on board.
Just want to quickly build on that very finally, because it's really, the timing is very, very interesting, because 2025, obviously based on 2024, isn't expected to be a brilliant one for Stake Sauber. And of course, it's 2026, which is the big year of Audi. In many ways, obviously, with Jonathan Wheatley now coming on board earlier than expected, it kind of gives him almost, I guess, 2025 to settle into the role, Ian, and really understand what being a team principal really requires.
How much will he have learned from Christian Horner over the years? Because effectively, the role of a sporting director is almost an assistant to the team principal in many respects. So, and Jonathan has got great track record, great history. He knows the regulations inside and out. He's one of those go-to guys whenever Red Bull has had to present any kind of technical or sporting regulation kind of case, then he's on the case, shall we say, and he's superbly represented Red Bull over his period of time. But yes, serving as a team principal, obviously a different role for him. He's now got to be front and center. He's going to be, of course, be required to talk to the media as often as possible, which is something very different because as a sporting director, he was very, very rarely interviewed during his time at Red Bull. Very much kept himself out of the media spotlight. But this is going to be something very different for him now, a different landscape. So, as I say, what will he have learned from Christian Horner over that period of time? That's going to be interesting to find out. But for me, again, another good appointment. And Christian, as rightly said, Jonathan is someone that has one of those guys, because of his history, has deservedly made that step up now into the position of team principal.
Only time will tell how he gets on. Sam, Ian, as always, amazing stuff. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast from Sam, Ian, and myself. We'll see you next time. See you later.
It's been an absolute pleasure, folks. Take care as always.
Thanks for joining us.